wasn't listening. I was
Bon dia y benvinguts. Buenos días y bienvenidos. Good morning and welcome al Smart Fruit IPM International Congress i al Fruit Business Forum internacional que ha de propiciar que els interessos.
This is the second edition of the International Congress in Catalonia. The idea is, together with the first Fruit Business Forum, there will be an effort made to benefit consumers and producers, and as well as the ecosystem, by sharing the latest technology in IPM and different crop management. That's why we have fruit producers.
El paisatge i l'ecosistema amb una voluntat de sostenibilitat futura. La salut humana i les preferències de consum han de formar part també dels objectius d'aquesta cadena. Durant 2 dies ens reunim aquí a Barcelona per debatre sessions que es realitzaran en forma de plenari en aquesta sala o en sessions de debat, ciència, tecnologia, empresa, específiques per cultius. Molt bona feina a tots plegats. I a continuació es procedirà a la conferència inaugural Pèrdues impacte en la presa de decisions a càrrec de Fonseca Lauren, responsable.
Bueno, we got off to a great start with the phone. Bloody hell.
It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to comment, first of all,
Es un desafío, puesto que
this is a challenge because the work which I've been doing with the organization for FAO does not necessarily have to do with the work that you are doing on pests. Nonetheless, what is interesting for me, and hopefully you share this with me, is being able to see the link between the important work that you are doing on the impact in food safety at a world level. Maybe so as not to create more confusion that already exists, allow me to share with you the next 30 minutes of my presentation. First and foremost, I would like to focus on what means food loss for us in FAO, and also to talk to you about the global initiative on food loss and food waste. The most important point, perhaps the most important reason I was asked to come and deliver my presentation to you, is to attempt to share the complexity, to look at the complexity of what is so difficult for decision makers to create macro solutions, in particular at a public level. And I know the work you are carrying out, and I know what is happening in local markets at a world level. I wished to look at the IPM and see how it is linked with food quality and food safety. We'll look at different issues around that. Furthermore, I would like to conclude my presentation by attempting to analyze what we believe, at least within FAO, what we believe is necessary as research and development. In half an hour, I won't be able to cover everything. I will inevitably leave outside the scope of my presentation certain important subjects. Basically, I'm not here to make specific suggestions. Maybe everything that everything I say is something that you already know. But what is important is to link what you are doing with a more global world context. In particular, seeing that fruit and vegetables are not just sold for export and for high quality and demanding markets, but also in many countries we are feeding populations with low quality levels.
La aclaración número 1.
Clarification number 1. I was one of those who was confused at the beginning when I was invited to this presentation, because I know that at least at an entomological level, most of the losses which we see in production are things which you consider production losses or a reduction in volumes of what could have been seen as food. Food losses for us, is a decrease in quantity and quality of food. Food, as defined by Codex Alimentarius, is a substance which is, when it was conceived to be produced, had the intention of being consumed by human beings, not by animals. For us, the loss of food starts when the food is ready to be consumed, the whole purpose which it was produced. That is why I was telling you that a lot of, when it comes to pests, are considered differently.
Son considerados como...
They are considered to be pre-harvest losses. But in this case, for instance, if we look at this particular lettuce, it reached its mature stage. It was not harvested at that moment because it was at a stage when the climate was not the most appropriate. This is in northern Mexico, beginning of April, when there's too much heat. That's it. And there are a lot of issues with different pests and diseases here. When we talk of cutting back post-harvest losses, we are seeing it in a more holistic fashion. We talk of efficient systems because we need everything that have this economic value which is behind. We're talking of inclusive systems. In particular, when we talk of attempts to formulate solutions, we want this to be targeted at small producers or any player within the supply chain who is small in size. Sustainable systems, we know well, are meaningless if the only point is to keep sustaining traditional systems we have used for a long time now, unless it is also targeted at future generations, in particular at an environmental level. An important aspect which I do think at an organizational level, in FAO we are attaching a lot of importance to, is this movement, this current movement, started about 20 years ago, of agglomeration in urban areas. In 2030, it is said that 2/3 of our population will live in cities. So there's this urban drift, if you like. A lot of growth will take place in sub-Saharan Africa. So how will this affect what you do? The migratory movement from rural areas to urban areas, this urban drift, in particular in developing countries, will also involves population movements which will have a direct impact on your endeavors. So the solution is a conclusion have to be accepted in economic terms. They have to be viable economically and environmentally. Data are very clear. When it comes to concerns on how to feed the world in an equitable fashion, to such an extent that the United Nations, from 2012 onwards, the Secretary General of the UN determined that as part of the challenge to zero hunger, the Zero Hunger Challenge, as the UN Secretary mentioned, is a question of this is going to be one of the cornerstones, or the main components, main objectives of our organizations. And to that end, a lot of our efforts are being directed at our constituents, basically the governments who are members of FAO. Let us look at some of the estimates of food losses. Here in this graph, you can see that the greatest losses will take place in food subproducts, fruits and vegetables, and roots and tubers. A lot is being lost in the field. The blue area includes which is agriculture, is losses not in pre-harvest but during harvest. This is what was determined by FAO consultant for this particular publication. But we are talking of almost half of losses of what is produced in fruit and vegetables. Almost half is being lost or is wasted. When we attempt to be more specific, we can see that there are certain changes when it comes to transition countries or developing countries or developed or industrialized countries. We can see that industrialized countries tend to lose them at the extremes of the supply chain. You have the harvest at a level of sort of for consumers, and the like the retail markets. This has to do with when it comes to harvest losses. This has to do with price varieties, and there's a general trend that the greater the disposable income within households, greater will be the food losses or waste of food in this particular instance. Now, when it comes to developing countries, the key issue there has to do with infrastructure and knowledge on how to manage these subfoods. The same happens with roots and tubers. I'd like to thank someone from the organization to help me to see the screen on my computer, which has vanished. The difference is that when it comes to industrialized countries, a lot is being lost in terms of potatoes, while developing countries, we have more issues with roots and tubers of a tropical nature. My apologies, but I can't seem to see the information on my screen. Thank you.
En términos,
So, when it comes in general terms, we see that at a regional level, there are two regions where there is cause for concern, in Latin America and the Middle East. In these two regions is where we find that economic growth is of such a nature that consumers are tending to greater waste patterns, but technology, infrastructure lags behind. So we are seeing cases such as in Brazil that a lot of the losses take place before the food reaches the consumer and also at the consumer stage. One of the important points which has to be mentioned in terms of FAO estimates is that, and we're talking of estimates here, let me stress that, this publication, which was the most significant one by FAO in 3 months, and the second most important or significant one for FAO in the past 2 years, it suddenly became the most read one or consulted one in our history. Consultants have checked it out, but there's no sort of standard methodology throughout at cross-cutting levels. That's what we're attempting to do now, to attempt to seek out data which are more trustworthy. If we do not have comparable data at a macro level, a question arises. Well, how many of these losses are due to pests? I think a clear estimate can take place when we talk of grains and cereals. But in fruit and vegetables, it's a lot more complex. And we are talking of different types of fruit, different varieties. And there are many factors which come to play here. And these are some of the aspects which I shall be checking with you. One of the points which certainly strikes us, for those of us who work in food and vegetables, is a level of food security, rather than food safety, food security. We've given priority to the calorie component of foodstuffs. To attempt to guarantee food security in a given country, first of all, we must ensure that there is sufficient availability of calories. So what happens then? You find countries in Latin America, for instance, where apparently the whole region can be considered to be secure from a food vantage point, with a few exceptions, maybe 3 or 4 countries. But there are countries which are close to achieving food security and where there are sufficient calories, but where there are not enough nutrients. So that is where we find problems with the population, where you have obesity and malnutrition living side by side. So these are the 4 most important components which you consider to be part and parcel of food security. The most important thing I wish to mention is that when it comes to use of foodstuffs, which is the pale blue circle at the top, there we're talking of diet. And that is where fruit and vegetables are essential. But fruit and vegetables, as we have seen, are food products which are lost most. So we are losing at the same time foodstuffs which contribute most to nutrients and which avoid malnutrition, as is proteins and so on. A bit more on losses. Despite the fact that FAO in its 2011 publication takes this with a pinch of salt, because of their estimates, there There have been a series of regional studies, more specific studies, and FAO in certain cases has not hit the target. We're talking of percentages which are not that far removed from global estimates. There are cases such as this. This goes back to 2007 when we're looking at losses in the United States. And we're talking of supermarkets here. Cases of papayas. Papaya is a fruit that is often lost in most cases because of post-harvest diseases. One of the most notorious instances. And so when we think of a fruit such as a papaya, and we see that almost all fruit which reach the United States from one particular area of Mexico, apart from Hawaii, leaving aside Hawaii, in the case of Mexico, all the production from that particular region of Mexico is only 25% is being consumed at a local level or at an international level. So a lot remains to be done. In particular, because there is certain produce or certain products where there is not sufficient knowledge. There is a requirement by consumers, there's demand by consumers, but the players in the supply chain are not fully aware of all the factors. Many sectors which are new feeding habits understand that a case like papaya can only be eaten, and this appeared in a survey, when the papaya on its skin has appearance of what looks like rot, because most of papaya has problems of pathogens, of if you like, fungi. Another illustrative case of foodstuff losses, and which doesn't interact so much with your field of activity, but there are possible links. After counting what is lost post-harvest, and in holdings and in the distribution and in the households, if we look at the calories associated with these foodstuffs, we can safely say that they are equivalent to 70% of the calories of foodstuffs which are consumed at the end of the day. So you can understand the amount of water consumption linked to this wasted food. In the case of fruit, this is even more so, because many of these foodstuffs are not even being used as non-food by animals for feed. Feed, for sort of nutrition for animals, has other components, which means that it is which makes a heavy demand on natural resources, as has been said. Other aspects, which many of you are aware of, is the globalization of markets and standardization of quality. Well, this means that many issues, such as this example, I started analyzing losses reported by the FDA of the United States, and I noted, and I used to work basically with vegetables, and I noticed that in the case of vegetables, 30%, or 26.6% to be exact, of rejects at border points by FDA were due to traces of unknown pesticides. Here it says unsafe, so unsafe pesticides, but in fact it's not necessarily the case. It means that they were not registered as such before the FDA or the appropriate authority in the United States. So that is why there are many losses. So non-compliance with approved standards in given countries. Now, within the FAO, we joined the global initiative to cut back losses and waste in foodstuffs. It has been fairly successful. It's been a fairly successful initiative with. I won't dwell upon that, but part of its remit is to carry out research with public institutions, with the support of the private sector. Here are some of the companies who have given, if you like, active support to the FAO initiative. We have 300 members registered. Some of them are participating in this meeting here. And FAO is also part of a series of campaigns, active part of a series of campaigns at a regional level. This particular initiative has taken form as a regional initiative in the different offices of FAO worldwide. But why is it so difficult? What do we need to, if you like, invest in subjects or in areas which will effectively cut back on loss and waste at a world level? And how can this influence on what you are working?
This is a document that was published last month. I'll give you the references for it. And you can see here, there's a calculation here that says that to reduce food losses by 5%, and here we're talking about huge quantities investments. For Africa, we're talking about 6 billion in capacity, road capacity. We also look here at paved roads, electricity. These are the most important aspects that make a difference. And of course, decision makers have a role to play here. However, all of this is quite costly, and for developing countries, it's even more difficult. Some years ago, when I was working with the academy, I was working with colleagues such as you, and we were with entomologists. And I wondered, how could thermal therapy apparatus or technology like this, which is so environmentally friendly and can be very effective, particularly when combined with some of the management practices used, how come it hasn't become more widespread? Well, you can see the photo here. The conclusion was that we have to consider the availability and cost of electrical power in many of these countries, whether it be Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. The same thing has to do with the possibility of keeping the cold chain. Some of these countries are doing better economically, and as a result, the population is eating more food. However, the infrastructure hasn't increased or improved to the same extent. If you look at Brazil, it's fairly low in terms of the cold chain. And it's one of the countries which has improved the most economically, but it still has some shortcomings. Well, there's a lot of knowledge amongst technicians, and there's a lot of technology available on post-harvest losses. Now, when we're talking about infrastructure, it's quite simple for many developing countries. It's cheaper to keep importing food from outside than to start trying to grow it locally because of local conditions. There have been cases such as this after 2011 and the terrorist attack in the U.S., this type of program was instituted, and some changes were made to try to better comply with the requirements of markets such as the U.S. market. But how many small producers could actually access this type of system and comply? This is the case of Honduras, where very few producers could actually take on board this type of technology. You can't even wear jewelry, they say, or your accessories to when you go out to the field, according to what's written up here. I'd like to conclude by trying to talk more about the challenges for the public sector to try to avoid such food losses. And of course, food losses due to pests. Part of the problem is a lack of data in terms of both quantity and quality. And for a government, it's difficult to make a difference if they don't know who is benefiting throughout the supply chain. Where are the benefits and the profits going? To know the price and cost structure, who's earning more and who's earning less. It's always generalized, but it's not always the producer who earns the least, and the intermediaries who earn the most. That's kind of a stereotype, but it's not always true. And it's important for the public sector to know this. In terms of technological capacity in different countries, your knowledge in what's going to be debated here hasn't spread out to, say, 2/3 of the scientific population of the world. And certainly governments are not aware yet of all of this information. So how to approach such interventions? There should be an effort made so that companies and producers take actions or even at a micro level as well as a macro level. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. Countries are increasingly concerned with environmental sustainability. So how can practices be encouraged that promote this? It's important to know which practices will best do this, will best benefit environmental sustainability. Of course, we have international standards and regulations. They're in place in order to protect local production as well. But the question is, how can we protect standards in developing countries? What about supermarket chains? Well, for consumers, they do have advantages, but one might wonder whether market chains that demand high quality are really targeting a certain type of consumer, ones who are really looking for that high quality. As a result, there's a lot of food which probably could be consumed. It's important for the government to know what to do with that nettlesome issue and how to motivate and give an incentive to social movements and consumers. Because on the one hand, we have the question of eco-food security on the one hand, and the other hand, we have what consumers want. end, I just want to refer to the blue here, what's written on the blue block here, with respect to food losses, which are often looked at from micro and macroeconomic standpoints, but there's the non-economic aspects such as entomology or phytopathology, plant pathology. However, this is not necessarily well known. We need better communication between the two, with the economic factors as well. Last year, FAO published a report of a high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition on food losses and waste. And in it, they realized that a lot of food was being lost at specific points in the chain. Not because of the problem in that point in the link in the chain specifically, but the problem came from farther upstream in the post-harvest moment. For many people, that was just trivial. It was unimportant. But in many ways, it was like a bucket of cold water. A lot of times, it was because there are people who are involved who weren't aware of the technical needs of this food. So the time has come to be able to bring together issues from the field, where perhaps there are problems, let's say there are diseases that originate in the field, and they continue to be a problem throughout the food chain. This is the case of Moldova. In many countries,
De alguna manera, los productos que aún
in many cases, this factor will continue to produce problems of quality. This is the case of bananas in Kenya. Many scientists would say this is poor quality. In agreement with this, up to 95% of the bananas going through the supply chain from Kenya would have been lost. They wouldn't have been sent to Spain for consumption. But 80% of those bananas were consumed. So the loss was only about 10 or 12%. Now, the important thing here is that Kenya is much better economically than other countries in that region, in Eastern Africa. It's improved economically. But as it improves, what may happen is that the quality requirement will increase. So there may be bananas then with crown rot or thrips that won't be consumed locally because people will be more demanding. So the question is, how demanding, how strict should we have to be with quality? And this brings in not only technological experts and technological considerations, but social considerations and even ethical considerations, because a lot of products are being tossed out, which other people would say was just for cosmetic reasons. A lot of plant pathologies, insects, and so forth can be a source of clinical bacteria. So we have to understand how food security and even public health, consumers' health, will be affected. To conclude, I'd like just to talk about what FAO sees as the direction that research could take, go further to pursue this effort to reduce food losses. One is that you, as entomologists, as plant pathologists, and so forth, people who are working to combat pests, how you could have an intercommunication with other disciplines so that food, because for food security, we need fruits and vegetables. I think in the next 10 or 15 years, and even now, this is something that is being looked at closely by the UN in terms of post-harvest interventions, either fumigations or other applications of pesticides. You know that there's a lot of cereals, a lot of grains that are being lost. Maybe it's just 1% of the total, but it's a lot. But in a lot of cases, even fruits and vegetables, we're depending on a single product to keep from losing those fruits and vegetables. We think that not only consumers but decision makers have to really understand how all of this works. That's why it's important for you to have an influence on other disciplines, and to know who will benefit from integrated pest management, because decision makers will always be interested in supporting and helping the most vulnerable part of the population, or at least that's what we would like to hope. And we've seen in some countries that it's important not to discard the local varieties, the intrinsically growing or varieties of food plants. However, in the country itself, they may be looking for something, the people may be looking for something else. And these older varieties, which should make it possible for a lot of small producers to compete, and in fact, for them, it might be the only way, this would require that there be an integrated pest management that is targeting these particular local old varieties. And this is not necessarily done. So, on the one hand, it's necessary to produce and to distribute quality, but it's also important to be able to provide quantity. Now, globally speaking, we may not have a specific idea of how IPM and post-harvest can be combined. From some of the companies providing agricultural inputs, I've learned, and I'm talking about some of the largest companies, 2/3 of customers are considered smallholders. So why not focus integrated pest management on these small holders? Another thing that we're lacking in many countries has to do with the use of digital technology. And undoubtedly here there's a lot more that could be done. In general, what I've tried to do in these in this presentation has been to provide some background for the situation of food security throughout the world, and so that we could see how an effort, if we made it, for example, in the area of integrated pest management, could resolve a lot of the problems of hunger throughout the world. I'll leave you with a question as well, which is this. I think it's very clear that we're producing enough food, even though it's not reaching all of the people who need it in the world. But in 20 years, this will become a huge challenge, particularly in the cities where people tend to cluster. So starting now, we should begin thinking, to what extent can we allow less than perfect fruit? Even in the Codex Alimentarius, and this has been discussed in FAO, even the Codex Alimentarius doesn't allow very minimal defects or flaws in fruits and vegetables. Well, in English, they call it blemishes, but it's more cosmetic or visual. It doesn't discuss what that means. What does a blemish constitute? So the question is, when can certain ones be permitted? Is it when or not permitted is when the blemish has been caused by a pest or by a fungus? Because otherwise, a lot of food is being lost unnecessarily for a lot of producers, particularly those who are following a really sustainable type of agriculture. To try to comply 100% with these standardized quality conditions is very difficult. Thank you very much, and I will. You have here my email address, and I would be delighted to be in contact with you and work together with you whenever possible. Thank you.
Moltes gràcies al senyor Fonseca.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fonseca, for your presentation. And now we shall hand the floor to the official opening of Smart Food IPM International Congress and Fruit Business Forum. Mr. Giuseppe Pellegrini-Schut, who is Regional Minister of Animal Husbandry, Fisheries, Foodstuffs and Environment and Agriculture, obviously, of the Catalan Regional Government, the Generalitat.
Molt bon dia, muy buenos días.
Good morning. Welcome to Barcelona. Today is a very important day for me personally, for my ministry, and for all those who have been working so hard to set up this Congress and a spin-off, the Fruit Business Forum, which is being held in parallel here in Barcelona. So welcome to our city, to the city of Barcelona. Welcome to Catalonia. Again, this second edition of Smart Food is an edition which wishes to seek, if you like, complicities. I have heard the final part of Mr. Jorge Fonseca's presentation, distinguished member of FAO. We are fully committed to FAO's principles concerning its underlying philosophy and its actions, and actions which FAO demands of its members, of administrations, of public decision makers, all those who are involved in agriculture and nutrition and foodstuffs, which has to be done, and we shall do it. And this is the second edition of the Congress. The first one we held last year. If we looked at surveys and satisfaction surveys and active participation by those who attended, it was valued very highly. The conclusions were quite ambitious, and that is why we were encouraged to carry out a second edition, and which have complemented the Fruit Business Forum. Catalonia, as you well know, is one of the territories, one of the nations which is most dynamic in southern Europe, with a clear vocation to be international in the scope of its action. It wishes to be a linkage point in the Mediterranean. We take on board the concept of the Mediterranean in terms of culture, in terms of landscape protection, in terms of diet, produce, and Mediterranean foodstuff production. And the so-called Mediterranean diet is one of the linchpins, when it comes to governing our food production. This culture which seeks excellence and which aspires to excellence wishes also to be a benchmark in the agri-food sector. That is why we have convened this parallel, this second edition in the city of Barcelona. And we do that with a formula of 2 in 1. Before you had 3 in 1 in our country. Well, now we used to have a 2 in 1. It includes the Smart Fruit and the Fruit Business Forum. Let me highlight the first event of the Smart Fruit Congress, the second edition. This wishes to be a turning point in the way we look at plant health, security, foodstuff sustainability, based on dialogue, encounters, joint reflection, exchange of experiences, knowledge exchange, and the presence of researchers, producers, and technical staff. This is the second edition. Last year, 70 world experts and 800 participants. This year, our, if you like, the theme is intelligent dialogue, intelligent growth. We wished to bring even more experts who presence I would like to publicly thank. I'd like to thank their making themselves available with more subjects and more crops. We also incorporate the debate of integrated pest management in fruit and vegetables, in quarantine pests, in strawberries and almond trees, and many other subjects who can directly be of interest to our producers. This would not have been possible without institutional support of the City Council of Barcelona, the Bank of Sabadell, whose full involvement, complicity, and help I publicly thank here. And with the sponsorship of companies and entities which have made this Congress possible in the true spirit of public-private partnership. Biocrop Science, BASF, Syngenta, Dow, Premium Lab, Kenengard, Nufram, ProDelay, and the speaker mentions all the sponsors. Our collaborators, and above all our sponsors, and all of you, a big thank you from me, because the public and the private sector jointly can provide a boost to production, a boost to competitiveness, a boost to our enterprises in this sector. At the beginning of my presentation, of my address, I was saying that we also have Fruit Business Forum, export.cat, which is a novelty, which is to be a point of encounter of business, where producers and exporters participate, from importers, producers, and exporters, importers in different parts of the world. What is our purpose? To generate an economic platform where interests of all stakeholders, of purchasers, of exporters, can meet to network and generate business flows. I would like to welcome the 51 international players from 18 countries who can represent a golden opportunity for us. We have people from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Russia, Armenia, Colombia, India, China, Nigeria, Senegal, Georgia, Korea, Qatar, United States, and Ukraine, and quite a few others. All these are markets which are of great interest to us and with considerable expectations. I also like to thank the president of 22 enterprises who are top-notch producers who have wished to accompany us with a legend. Our market is the world. I would like to thank all private enterprises and public administrations who have ensured that in this key year from an export viewpoint, we can attempt to find solutions to ensure that we can successfully take up this new challenge. I'd like to thank Basfi Ingenta, the Chamber of Commerce of the province of Lleida, and Bank Sabadell for their help and assistance in this event. When we decided to set up this Congress, we had one idea in mind: to help everyone and to ensure that it should have link with agri-food health. Last year, by a series of contributions, we became aware, quite about centering on health. We realized we could not lose sight of setting up cross-cutting approaches. That is why this Congress also this Congress is known as Smart Fruit. Smart, a key word. Last week, after all, the Mobile World Congress was set up with the term smart as one of its keynote terms. So, when it comes, we wish to, Father Philip, to intelligent production, knowledge transfer, applicable to the field of farming and agriculture. And we are committed to having diversity amongst our speakers, from agricultural production, distribution, marketing, science, research, experts in food health, who in the next couple of days will help us to move forward. This year we wish to take a step forward, we should go beyond. We wish to make an encounter for international business networking. In many of the challenges are closely linked up to the future destination of our production. Often, plant health has been used as an excuse, as a pretext to stop our products from entering markets. We should overcome that plant health should no longer be an excuse, a pretext, a commercial barrier. We wish to take it seriously and move forward to ensure that more deals are signed and they be successful. Our approach is different from the past years. Before, we used to look at production, exclusively at production. We could not understand production without looking at sustainability, looking at sustainability at all levels. We must produce what the consumer wants. We must look at the legal framework, and we must look at the market and bear it. That is why in the next few days we'll talk of fruit, yes, but of health, its concepts, and all from a wider perspective. We shall be rigorous with an aspiration to defend our production, to ensure that safe, quality, and healthy fruit reach the consumer's table, which is a source of healthy nutrients, and all under the umbrella of the Mediterranean diet, of our Mediterranean features. Catalonia wishes to be, and wishes to continue being, a significant player in fruit and vegetables. We have been defined as a agri-food benchmark. We should be the agri-food hub of Southern Europe, thanks to the clusters formed by, if you like, business fabric and our infrastructures, harbors and airports of our companies, and in, if you like, benchmark international fairs and events such as Alimentaria. I would urge you to take advantage of your presence here to enjoy our food, and Barcelona is a hallmark of Catalan gastronomy, and Catalonia has been named in 2016 European Center for Gastronomy. Let me describe our country to you. Catalonia has intensive animal husbandry and agriculture, highly competitive, highly technical in nature, and it does not live off subsidies. And ask farmers, who are always asking for more public money. Our country has 73,000 agricultural holdings, and with a value over 471,000 million euros. These are figures of 2013. We're talking of 5,200 agri-food industries with a turnover of 24,000 million euros. Catalonia is the driver of the Spanish industry. We represent 23.3% of the agri-food industry of Spain, and we're the second business cluster of agri-food industry, which in Europe, the second most important in Europe. Catalonia has one of its, if you like, linchpins. We are the fourth world producer of pears, peaches, and nectarines, and one of the most important ones in terms of apples. In many hectares dedicated to fruit crops, we produce more than 1 million tons of pears, peaches, apples, nectarines, basically. If you look at these figures, we should add 20,000 tons of citrus fruits, basically produced in the southern part of the country in the Ebro Valley, and it is been recognized by UNESCO as a biosphere reserve. And the fruit there produced has a brand which is associated to UNESCO. There are innovations in social and environmental sphere. We produce quality fruit in traditional agriculture, in the integrated one, and with different denomination areas, fruit in Girona, in Lleida, and almonds in Reus. We are exporters. 25% of our fruit is marketed in external markets, and wish to increase that figure. Countries make up the European Union concentrate, as is normal, most of the demand for this production. In the last few years, the Gulf, the Caucasus, Asian countries, and some markets of Latin America and Africa are also received our produce, become new markets. Catalonia has increased to the tune of 58% fruit to outside and has overtaken Italy. Catalan fruit is present in European supply chains, which are very demanding in terms of quality. If we look at data concerning production and export, they have given us a unique know-how. This know-how is based on the large research centers, universities, and transfer and advice. I'd like to highlight the work of plant defense associations, because without them, the high level of excellence in our production would not be possible. And this Congress would not be possible either. There are a number of points which are key for me. Key bodies, the IRTA, the Institute for Research in Agri-Food, with presence throughout the world, which is a correspondent of, in terms of the fruit.net, in the use of PPPs and limiting residues in fruit production. And the other iconic is the Fruit Center, which is in Lleida, in the center, in the heart of the fruit production of Catalonia, with a multidisciplinary approach, a global approach, looking at the value chain of fruit, and which applies technical knowledge from the field to the final consumer. Combined with technical and field work, Catalonia is now a leader in plant health, in prevention and in research, and a leader in setting up, hopefully, plant defense associations and in IPM. We are convinced that plant health is essential for a viable and top quality fruit and vegetable production. We all know that plants with good nutrients have greater productivity, better production, and are better prepared to resist attacks by pathogens or global trends which are affecting us. Integrated pest management should allow us to have a farm system which can feed a population which in 50 years' time, according to figures by FAO, will increase to the tune of 70%, and all the inhabitants deserve quality nutrients. That's why Catalonia wishes to provide innovative acumen as an essential element of our production. If innovation does not reach our companies or our farms, we shall lose value, lose efficiency, and lose competitiveness. Knowledge will only lead to intelligent growth if it is carried out by those who can make proper use of these resources. We don't innovate for its own sake, but so that this benefits the companies involved. I hope you can fully enjoy the program we have designed very professionally. They can make full use of time and experiences, and that your conclusions will be practical and useful. We wish to generate a potential of knowledge which can enrich you. We make it available to you. And from here, I'd like to thank all of you for your participation, and I would urge you to open up new ways of thinking, new pathways. They look at challenges which make you constantly question your endeavor, to look at new routes, new pathways, new challenges. We, after all, live in a globalized world, and we must be up there in the front. We must always be alert at new trends, at what is happening, to launch forth without fear, hesitation, and to cooperate with the technical and academic community to advance. If we cannot do things which provide us with added value, our future will be rather bleak. I urge all of you to take full part in all the activities of this Congress, and that you avail yourself of the chance to get acquainted with Catalonia, a hospitable land, and with this wonderful city of Barcelona. Finally, a few brief words to the international operators and traders here. Our country, our private sector, public sector, our operators know about exports. We know what our market is. Our market is the world. Last year, we reached a historical record of exports, more than 60,000 million euros, with a year-on-year growth of quite high figures. The export to the European Union grew by over 1%. There are thousands of export companies in Catalonia. This figure is a growth of 8.6% year-on-year. Barcelona, as you well know, and Catalonia as a whole, aspires to become the great logistical platform of southern Europe. Our economy is solid, dynamic, with a tendency to grow. With 16% of the Spanish population as a whole, represents 19% of GDP of Spain. We represent 25% of international trade within Spain, and a very high percentage of foreign tourism. Our economy is one of the most open ones of southern Europe and the most open ones in the Mediterranean. In 2014, we grew 1.2%. It's the best data of GDP since 2007. We are 8th in the EU chart of people who work in research and development, vis-à-vis the total of those employed. Above benchmark countries is Italy and the UK, at the same level as the Netherlands. And wide-ranging congresses, such as Mobile World Congress last week, trust in our professional approach, and Alimentaria, I cannot leave, is twice yearly, or biannual benchmark in terms of food trade fairs. We have friends. We are willing and eager to seek out partners to do business with, to reach a win-win situation, to operate in the agri-food sector. I would urge you to share experiences, to share what concerns you, what excites you. We are prepared to deliver you with a product you need. We wish to be familiar with your market and that you also become acquainted with our country and our produce. We would like you to grow and prosper jointly. With these words, and without further ado, I declare open this year's edition, the second edition of Smart Fruit. Thank you yet again for your presence and urge you to make full use of these days, enjoy them, learn from what you from your activities here to strengthen the sector, to strengthen the companies, and to offer healthy, safe, and nutritive foodstuffs. That's possible thanks to you. Thank you very much and good morning.
A continuació,
We will now hear the talk on the current state of research in integrated pest management, diseases, and weeds by Dr. Ramon Albajes Garcia, who's a professor at the University of Lleida. He obtained his doctorate in agronomic engineering from the Polytechnic University of Madrid. He has been a full professor at University of Agriculture and Entomology. He's from 1976 to 78. He was at the University of Madrid, the Polytechnic University, and the Polytechnic University of Catalonia, and from 1979 to 1992. And he's been at the University of Lleida since 1992. He currently works at Centro Agrotecnio, the CERCA Center in Lleida, on ecology and control of agricultural pests, specializing in integrated biological control. He's worked in the area of vegetable crops, both in greenhouses and outdoors, large-scale farming as well, of different grains, as well as corn and alfalfa. He's published over 100 scientific articles on his specialty, and he frequently speaks throughout Europe on genetically modified cultivars and non-target species of arthropods. He's currently Vice President, Treasurer, and honorary member of the International Organization for Integrated Biological Control. You have the floor, sir. Hello, everybody, and thank you for that presentation. Authorities, colleagues, friends, I want to begin by expressing my thanks for being invited to come to speak here. I'm delighted to be here and to speak about this topic, which I've spent all of my professional life studying, and of course to be here in this lovely city. Starting here, I will begin in speaking in Spanish, and I will have my talk up here in English. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be dividing my talk into 3 parts. First, why we need to go faster in applying integrated pest management for diseases, pests, and weeds. The components of IPM, looking at different topics and different challenges that have been the subject of research. I'll be focusing mostly on IPM, but I will also refer to the integrated control of diseases and weeds. I'll start by looking at why IPM is necessary in the 21st century. One of the reasons why we need greater productivity, faster productivity, have to do with this research. It was already referred to by Fonseca, who talked about the need for food in the world, and we're seeing that we're going to be between 9 and 10 million inhabitants. In 2030, there will be a major increase in the production of meat and dairy products, which of course are more expensive in terms of the inputs required to produce them. On this graph, we can see a comparison of the world production of meat in the developed countries on the left and the developing countries on the right. If you look at 1974 in blue and 2000 or whatever in yellow, you can see how the demand has multiplied. That means productivity has to increase as well. Here, we see the rate of increase of production, which is accelerating. This was 2007, and it forecasts an increase in demand for biofuels. It's stagnated a little bit because of the drop in the price of oil, but in any case, this rate will be even higher, around 2.5% annually. So let's forget about what people say we have enough food. No, we need more food and we need more productivity. This will be impossible to do without integrated pest management. Secondly, because the consumption of pesticides is increasing in Spain, Europe, and the rest of the world. This is somewhat controversial data because the measurement of plant protection products, when we look at these studies, can be misleading because these products are more expensive now. So the value of what is being sold is greater. It's not because more is being used, but because they become more expensive. They're being used at lower concentrations. And we can see the applications are actually this is dropping, not because we're using fewer pesticides, but we're using them in smaller concentrations or lower quantity. If you look in Eurostat or other statistical sources, the data do not always coincide. Here we have the evolution over the last 5 years of plant protection products in Spain from 2001 to 2013, and you can see the number of the amount in euros. In Europe, we have ECBA as a source, and it talks of going from 7,900 to almost 7,900 to almost 10,000. If you do the same thing with worldwide consumption, you can see the same is true to a lesser degree, but there is an increase from 40,500 in 2008 to 47,000. So from these data, we can conclude that the consumption of pesticides is continuing to grow. Losses are quite an obstacle. I'm going to be going over this very quickly because it's already been mentioned, but these are the losses caused before these products are marketed. Once they've been sold, we're not including that aspect. In the first column, we see possible losses if we didn't do anything to protect ourselves against our plants against pests, weeds, and diseases. We'd lose 77.4%. Real losses, or total estimated loss, would be around 32%, which shows how effective the control is, or this is 52%, 2.5%. This was maybe from a few years ago. However, if you look at weeds, effectiveness was 60% thanks to herbicides or viruses, which has very low effectiveness. In general, losses are quite high, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to keep working on our protection techniques. This is true despite the fact that a lot of pesticides are being used. Here, this is from 2004, so you see here in dollars per hectare. In Europe, we have about $100 per hectare between fungicides and insecticides. something a bit higher than the rest of the world is North America, because it's more technologically advanced, or the Far East, or other averages for the world. At the end of the 20th century, we're hearing about the paradox of an increased use of pesticides, which can't keep losses from increasing. This was a study that was supported by IFPRI. So, I mean, we might suspect that it had a certain bias, but it talked about the need to increase sustainability in our pest, disease, and weed control. I'm sure you all know one of the problems of pesticides is resistance to pathogens, weeds become resistant to them. The emergence of secondary pests, pollution in the environment, and residues in food above permitted levels. I would then refer to the directive on the need to considerably improve production techniques based on the Directive 2009/128. There are some landmarks in IPM in Europe, which I'll now refer to. I think everybody would agree at this point that this publication, which was published at the very end of the 50s by 4 entomologists in California on the concept of integrated pest management, was the starting point for something which later became integrated control in the world. In Europe, it arrived not long after, and I'm not going to go through the whole history, but these were some highlights. There were there's an organization for integrated pest management, which began in Europe, and in fact, it celebrated its 50th anniversary now. It later spread throughout the world. Europe at that time was very fragmented with many languages, different traditions, and political systems, and yet it's made it possible for many researchers, scientists, and even extension workers to cooperate and to work together. And in fact, they have working groups that meet regularly. I'm sure most of you are aware of this. Furthermore, a major role has been played by the amount of resources through its framework programs, and now, which with H2020 has allocated to such programs. With only one exception, in all of these cases, there have been resources allocated for research on IPM and related subjects. In these these programs for the control of pest, disease, and weeds, both nationally and sectorally, into IPM is included. And Dr. Decal suggested that a commission be set up to determine priorities and research for the coming years. Amongst the 3 priorities, IPM was one of the priorities considered. I won't go into it now, but you can find this on the INEA website. Our conclusions from the scientific community have been summed up, and we now have a meeting planned for the INEA headquarters in Madrid with the business, and we're going to look at different cross-cutting topics in the area of integrated control, biotics in the farming and forest systems, local and exotic species. This is very important right now. Increasingly, we have new species of weeds, new species or varieties of pathogens, insects, mites, and other plant protection products and different methods of control. 62 deleterious agents were selected, some of which were of special priority. there were 12 insects and mites. Then we had fungi, plant pathogens, different viruses, weeds. You can see the figures up here. And we have a mollusk as well. This is the apple snail. What about the challenges of scientific research in Europe, and in particular the south of Europe, on plant health? I compared how some years ago IPM and similar aspects appeared in the scientific and general literature. Looking at what agricultural entomologists and pathologists were publishing. The term IPM was used mainly by entomologists. In fact, entomological societies were amongst the first to make this a widespread, widely used words. But in the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century, more than 10% of these 20% of their reports referred to IPM, but only 2% or a little more of the reports by pathologists referred to IPM. That said, after being created in 2009, the directive on these issues went through a number of debates in Brussels, and the question was then became, what can we expect from this? When the directive was published, we were hopeful of taking a great leap forward in integrated pest management in Europe. The directive says things like member states shall take all necessary measures to promote pesticide in low pesticide input pest management and give priority to non-chemical methods. That was written for the first time here in European legislation. In Article 5, it also says that member states should ensure that all professional distributors and advisors shall have access to appropriate training by bodies designated by the competent authorities. This refers to both their initial and ongoing training to increase their knowledge. This was transposed to Spanish legislation in 2011, and some of these statements are fairly disappointing. It says that for to be an IPM advisor, you only need to have 12 credits of training. That seems incredible. In the Spanish Association of Plant Health, and I'm a member, we had tried to lobby the government, but we lost. So I wonder here, if you go to a to your general physician and you say, how long have you been studying medicine? They said, oh, I had 12 hours. What would you think? There are tons of courses, and there's no guarantee of any quality. It's shameful, really. There are millions of hectares of Spanish agriculture to which this is not applied. They don't have advisors because they thought that the farming they were already doing was fairly good, and that they could just go online and get this information, and they used that for their farming. That is a source of optimism. But there are many areas, agricultural areas, that haven't come under this directive. Greenhouse production, corn, rice, pulses, etc. Probably there are many other areas which are not being covered by this legislation as well. If we look at the challenges in terms of IPM, those of you who've studied at the University of Lleida will know about this because it's something that we really stress. And I think it gives a pretty approximate idea, without going into detail, of what we're talking about, which is a system of components and relationships between them. You have the plant, the cultivated plant, but that's not the only one. There are others. Some of them are weeds, and some herbivores eat those. Some of those are also pests, etc. Marcus Kogan, who's a well-known entomologist, has a phrase, and it was published in that literature. And he says, review of the vast literature on IPM shows that success has come essentially from understanding how the ecosystem works, the ecology of interactions between the pest and control efforts. That is, between the disease and weeds. Very rarely has it come from some kind of revolutionary discovery. Here, I've included some of the changes that are occurring with climate change. 15 years ago, it was one thing, and now it's quite different. I can look at some of the components thereof, however. The insect-plant relationships, or host-plant resistance and tolerance. This is a tool that pathologists in disease control have been very clear on. There are pathologies who look at resistance in the broad sense of the word, and we're seeing that it's up to about 30%. Entomologists have been slower in taking this up. It's more developed for diseases, but less for pests. But they're catching up now. Increasingly, we know how cultivated plants react to insects. Part of it comes from the relationship between the pathogen and the cultivated plant, or the plant that's being grown. But, for example, the attack of an insect begins with a lesion, and pathology is not necessarily the same. When it's a pathogen, it's not necessarily like that. The insect can move around. The pathogen may not necessarily be able to. The insect response will be at the cell level or at the community level, for example. So the whole process is much more complex. We know much more about the relationships between plants and insects and pathogens and plants. There's a lot of information and scientific articles being produced. The question is, when will this knowledge be applied in practice through control and through plant management? It's obviously technology transfer is important and necessary to this process. In terms of biological control of pests, in the case of resistance, this was more a subject dominated by pathologists. This is more something that entomologists have been interested in, although pathologists are now becoming interested. Some 25% of publication at the end of the 20th century and the beginning of this century by scientists and non-scientists who are entomologists has been on biological control. This is much a lower percentage amongst pathologists. For you to have an idea of the importance of natural enemies on the control of diseases, we have just a few pests, a very low percentage compared to all of them that we could see in a crop. And the reason we don't have more more diseases or more losses, it's because there are natural enemies, which we may not be aware of, which are doing their job. Thousands of natural enemies are improved yearly for biological control. exotic ones that can be imported, other non-exotic ones that are local and need to be conserved. There's been a lot of criticism on the use of these techniques. The use of a natural enemy to control exotic pests is something that has been highly criticized, and there has been legislation going on in Europe and the US and America on what can be imported, what can't be imported. For this, we need the cooperation of scientific organizations, as well as governments in EPO and IMA, etc.
Mayor importancia y necesitamos más investigación muy local, muy pegada al terreno.
The biological control, as is practiced today, is inviable in the long term.
Debemos hacer un esfuerzo por incorporar los enemigos naturales autóctonos a esa investigación.
Give me an example. Greenhouses in Spain. We have the largest number of greenhouses in Europe. More than 50% of the species in the Mediterranean greenhouses are native or autochthonous. Therefore, perhaps we should start to get to know and study and promote how we can take full advantage of this fauna. Control of conservation in fruit trees, as we're in smart fruit. It has been a field that of the fruit trees where we've always practiced a biological conservation practice. We have conserved what we got and make full use of it. I started working in the 1970s. I went to Lerida from Madrid. I asked my colleagues, well, what can we do here which makes sense and where we can take important steps forward? We're looking at the situation, took stock of it, and at that time, for the control of red spider in the apple, we needed 4 or 5 acaricides. Now, a properly managed holding, well, you'll have less than 1 because someone in the University of Lleida could make available to the sector how to handle the crop to take advantage of the autochthonous fauna in the area. So sometimes it is quite amusing to see how companies at this time are attempting to launch species in fruit trees. I'm not saying it's never going to be useful, but let us not forget that those autochthonous natural enemies, which will be the key. Other subjects in biological control will be important and are being important, in particular for conservation, is to study not just our practice, but integrated control at a regional level. There's a lot of research being carried out from public administration, looking at the most active ones at IPM, the importance of landscape, of landscape components, how pests move, why we have pests in certain areas depending on the landscape, why we have natural enemies and so on. There's a meta-population ecology, which is a promising sphere. Microbial control, that's another field where we're moving forward, and we're moving faster and faster. We have, talked to colleagues in other universities, in Córdoba, Navarra, or the Autonomous University of Barcelona, who are working in microbial control. They have told me that there's some subjects where there's much research done, and the solution of these subjects will help a lot to improve implementation of microbial control. How can we make compatible these microbial methods with other methods? For instance, attract and kill. We attract a vector, an insect. Either we kill it with a microbial insecticide, or we infect it with a microbial agent, and we help to have an epizootia due to this microbial agent, which is one of the big issues. Some viruses have an epizootic capacity, others do not. So we must understand new actions, new modes of action of entomopathogens. For instance, last week I read an article in Biocontrol where it posited that in a vineyard or in several vineyards where there had been homopathogen, there had been a clear drop in the incidence of vine mildew. How strange. Some colleagues discovered a while back that entomopathogenic fungi move within the plant and they create induced resistance. They are endophytic fungi, and this allows the control of other diseases, other pests, new formulations to tolerate limiting environmental conditions for microbial methods. Biotechnology is contributing a lot, and it will contribute more and more in biopesticides unless we are insist on stopping biotechnology in agriculture. One of the most stupid things has been taking place in Europe, and overcoming registration issues. But that's a question of legislation. But from a scientific viewpoint, we must say that it's crazy to demand for registration purposes in Europe certain conditions to microbial insecticides. When it comes to microbial control in crop diseases, plant diseases, in the last few years is becoming more and more important. Well, a few things could be said, which I'm not going to dwell upon, but there are many mechanisms, antibiotics, lytic enzymes, competition-induced resistance, and so on, hyperparasitism, and we must take advantage of it to control diseases. At this moment in time, both in pre and post-harvest, we certainly have a series of preparations which are promising, and more so in the future. Cultural controls. If we look at the publications of cultural control within IPM, they're only 5%. It's only 5%. How do we manage, how do we handle the habitat, how do we handle the crop to make sure that it becomes more resistant to pests, and how can it be made more amenable to natural enemies? Well, it's a long-winded research, not very sexy, if you like. It doesn't lead to a whole arsenal of publication, but it is essential. Some of my colleagues in Cabrils will remind me that, or remember that back in the 80s there was a publication, Cultural Control for Integrate for IPM, and when we started promoting IPM in greenhouse-produced tomatoes in north of Barcelona and the Maresma, we became aware that farmers accepted everything that had to do with biological control. That was fine, but they followed the same practices they were using when they had PPPs, or a PPP-based approach. So as we were the suppliers of the natural enemies, we produced a little publication. Everyone who does not meet these cultural controls will not receive help, and that did allow things to move forward. Pesticides for IPM. There are fewer and fewer active ingredients. We know that. Everyone knows that this has certain consequences, but there are greater incentives for developing IPMs in crops with no plant protection products. There are new characteristics in pesticides. Today, it used to be optional, it's essential. Precision agriculture, which allows us to adjust, fine-tune spraying volumes for the canopy, recognition of targets to spray. So only spray PPPs where they're strictly necessary, and other actions from several spheres will help us to drop the need for PPPs in IPM. Talking of pesticides, I believe that integrated control, IPM, has developed an awareness that there are less and less trenches, an activity where those of us who are in favor of this approach can reach agreement. And we believe that we can increase the surface with IPM. If we're talking about pheromones, well, we know there are hundreds and hundreds of pheromones which have been identified, but only a dozen are used in IPM. Today, pursuant to this publication of an entomologist in California, Jocelyn Villa, more than 10 million of hectares under application, not just with pheromones, but with other semiochemicals, or chemicals for communication. Down there on the right, you can see how, since the 90s, the surface protected with confusion has increased for Carpocapsa, and which moved from 0 in 1990 to about 200,000 in 2010. This publication is by Peter Bitskald, a Swedish colleague who has worked a lot in Europe on this. And Jocelyn Miller, in a very interesting publication, in a web-based publication in Florence, and anyone who's interested in this, I urge them to read it, with a lot of experience, reviews what pushes forward research on pheromones. Research is based on several aspects. Number one, we need to get to know the knowledge of insects. Many pheromone programs fail because we're not fully familiar with sort of insect conduct or consumer behavior, because they have new pests. New pests of an exotic nature or emerging ones. Normally, we are not fully aware of pheromone features. We have to develop that. Crop characteristics. Pheromones are applied to a crop, and they can change. Economical perspectives are important as well. Okay, I'll move on. Then a big development of communication chemical products. 3 million hectares are treated in the world for trimedia for medfly. 3 million hectares, that's a lot. Then chiromones for natural enemy management, or for push and pull techniques. These technology which the British call push and pull, to either attract the insects to deal with them or to keep them at arm's length before concluding. And I am hearing complaints of weed managers. They say, "Oh, you never take any notice." Well, I was talking to one weed management expert in my office. Said, "Well, why don't you mention a few trends which are relevant for research?" And he gave me jotted down a few ideas, which I've attempted to summarize in these 5 bullet points. How to adjust herbicide doses and volumes to the required amounts. That is done in many fields, but in the field of herbicides, which is more important as a technique in IPM than other facets, much of this amount is wasted or is not useful. We need to be a lot more familiar with biology. We've always been repeating that mantra, like to those who have the keys to research. Say, "Oh, biology for pests, that's ancient, that's old hat." No, but without this base research, we won't move forward. Reduction of pollution caused by herbicides, in particular in wetlands, in humid areas, we've had problems. The links between insect pests, diseases and weeds, and finally the detection, containment and eradication of exogenous or exotic plants. That's a big issue. And this is a photograph from a friend of mine, Taberner, who shows that of a plant which exists around here. Many of you who are familiar with this area will know that. If we look at tools, well, I think we're not going to have time for that, so let's move on to a few final thoughts. We have to question, what do we need to push IPM? Well, since we research at a basic level until it is implemented by a farmer, a series of years pass by and a series of protagonists come into play. I've counted 7 important stages or protagonists. They are ordered separately in different areas because we work separately almost always. It is obvious that this path is not very effective. We'll have to find platforms which bring these together, these components together. Without this, it's going to be very, very difficult to work forward. We must find bridges, institutional bridges, if you like, activities which allow us to provide linkage between what we do. For instance, right now, there's a definition of re-stress, which is an important tool and which will play a role in this field. In Lleida, we have, linked with the Polytechnic University of Barcelona and the University of Girona, we have attempted to offer a platform to accelerate, to transfer technology which exists. The Spanish section of plant health, we would like to turn that into a platform to integrate all players of plant health in Spain, not just researchers, but also people from plant health, technicians, etc., and so on. Without this cooperation, it's going to be really difficult to move forward faster. Thank you very much for your attention.
Moltes gràcies al doctor Albages per la seva intervenció.
Thank you very much, Dr. Albages. And now we'll have a break. We're going to go and have some coffee in the hall outside. And we'll come back here at 11:45 in each of the specified rooms in the program for the different crops. Apples in the Doe one, other ones in the BSF and in the Bio. Most of the interventions will be in English. And those persons who do not understand can pick up headsets to listen to interpreting. Thank you.
She submarines, the rope loops round her feeble feet. Before the dawn breaks on her sorry grasp, in a blinking in one more steps towards the ocean.